Dr. Scott Conkright. This is the Meaningful Happiness Pap. Hi, this is Dr. Conkright. Hi, this is Dr. Scott Conkright. Welcome to the Meaningful Happiness Podcast. Guess what I'm going to talk about today? Feelings and affects. Kind of to be expected, right? One of the things I really have loved about learning about affect theory is the wonderful way that affects combine to make emotions. And what I find really fun and pretty amazing, in some ways from a literary point of view, is how they combine to make really subtle emotions that writers try to find the words for. So I played around with this on ChatGPT. I put in all the affects and descriptors and so forth. And I have a private account with one of the apps where I can put in all my writing and things like that, and all my research and everything else and everybody else's. And so it has a big database of stuff on affects. And what I did is I put in all the affects and said to start combining them and to do all the permutations and to give me what the descriptors would be possibly. And I got through 100, some of them. I think there's just a few thousand, maybe more. I don't know what the permutation, I don't remember high school algebra at all. Something like each one, so there's 9, so I'm not even going to try, but I think they multiply out into a pretty big number. I didn't get that far, but I will say that when I started reading them, I went, wow, this is really amazing. And so I'm going to give you some of these. And in the process, I'm going to talk more about feelings and affects. And some of the stuff that ChatGPT gave me is powerful. It gave me some insights, and it's going to give us some insights that I think were otherwise not available. One of the pleasures that I have is to sit around at night when I'm bored and throw in various ideas and see what I get. It always gets my interest. So one of the interests I have right now that I'm going to do in a podcast coming up is talk about attachment theory and attachment styles based on shame defenses. So I'm going to just briefly touch on that today. Where am I? Let's see. So the whole point of this, as far as I'm concerned, is to understand how we feel, know what the feelings are, know where they're coming from, and have some understanding of how to take care of ourselves around the bad feelings, recognize them as affects so we can stop feeding the negative ones. And then how do we maximize the positive ones? That's really what we want. We want both. We certainly want to increase the positive ones and minimize the negative ones. And in order to minimize the negative ones, we've got to recognize them sooner and not feed them. They love to be fed, especially shame and anger. So we need to think about the affects in a couple different ways. I think there's possibly 3 ways metaphorically you can put them together or think about the affects as blending ingredients for food. They could be words that make up sentences and then paragraphs, or they could be colors and variations of colors. And so when you add them together, like on a palette, the affects create all the different emotions. So again, we have 2 positive affects, 1 neutral, and 6 negative ones. The positives are interest, excitement, and enjoyment, joy. They're on a continuum. And then there's shame, which on the low end, I talked about last week. On the low end, I'm calling shame self-consciousness, self-doubt. And both of those are probably at really mild self-doubt and really mild self-consciousness are probably the lowest you can get on the shame scale. And then you move up from there. When you combine the affects of interest, excitement plus shame, self-consciousness, you get curiosity with insecurity. What in the world could that mean? Well, what it says here, what it printed out for me, what it spat out for me, it said, imagine being eager to learn something new, but feeling unsure of yourself. This combination might create a hesitant curiosity where you're interested, but hold back because of self-doubt. Alternatively, on a more positive note, you can use that, and it can motivate you to improve whatever you're doing, to improve yourself. It can draw you to learn more, to reflect more, to take a look at your insecurities and see how you can overcome them. So combining those two, again, interest, excitement, and shame/self-consciousness, give that particular one. And my guess is that there's others as well. And if you think of some, write me, let me know. Put it in the notes or in the comments. The second one is when you combine enjoyment, joy, and anger. And they're called, ChatGPT in this case, is calling it passionate advocacy. So when you find deep joy in a cause, but you're facing obstacles, anger can fuel your drive to fight for what you believe in. This blend creates a wonderful emotion where your joy in the cause and frustration at barriers combine to make you a passionate advocate. It's pretty cool as far as I'm concerned. Now the next one, I think everyone will relate to quite a bit. Many of you will. When you combine fear-terror, continuing with fear-terror, and self-consciousness. Now fear on the low end, and self-consciousness, shame on the low end. You can get variations depending on how intense each one of those is, the fear and the shame continuum. You're going to get social anxiety, which is a fascinating thing to think about. That social anxiety has to do with a couple different sources of shame. So fear of judgment, that's where the fear part comes in, is the fear of the judgment, actually fear of shame as well. And the sense of shame can lead to social anxiety. You might dread social situations, not just because you fear them, but also because you're deeply aware of how other people might judge you. And that fear, that worry that people are judging you, can get really heightened. And your self-consciousness around being around other people, depending on how much shame you're living with, how much self-consciousness and self-doubt you're living with, can get remarkably uncomfortable. At an extreme, it can become paranoid, become really paranoid, to the point where you're not going to leave the house. You're going to isolate. So when we add distress, anguish, and interest, excitement, we get resilient curiosity. So feeling distressed can be overwhelming when facing a difficult situation. But if you're curious and interested in the challenge, this mix can lead to resilient curiosity. It pushes you to keep exploring and learning even when things get tough. So one of the things I want to point out to here is that it's very rare that we're going to have an affect all by itself in isolation. I think the only time you see that is in infancy. And very quickly, it doesn't take more than a year or two where they start getting more and more complex. They start blending together. And so you'll get that curious, apprehensive, frightened, but at the same time, really interested in what's happening. And it's how parents in the world around these infants, around children, instruct them about how to deal with these complex feelings that is part of their emotional intelligence and affective intelligence. So the next one is what happens with the fight or flight response. So when you add anger and fear, terror combined, the body is going to respond with fight, flight, or freeze. But you notice in this case, the way this model works is that the mind, the brain, our neurological system works with our affective system, and the affective system is what triggers the vagus nerve in this case, the neurological system. So the fear comes first, and then your body immediately goes into fight, flight, or flight. Try that again. Fight, flight, or freeze. This mix is the essence of that, where you're caught between the urge to act and the desire to escape. It's a survival mechanism, but in modern times, in current times, it can be triggered by our imaginations. It can be triggered by much less dangerous things, such as really stressful situations. I'm going to get in front of a bunch of colleagues and give a presentation. Getting in front of a camera. The first time I got in front of a camera to do this, it took a while. There was a little bit of a panicky feeling. I was very, very concerned about how other people might, understandably, I was a little concerned about how other people might see me. I wasn't used to being in front of the camera. I think it was more on the social insecurity spectrum than the fight or flight response. So let me explain to you how I'm understanding self-doubt. I'm seeing self-doubt as that voice in your head, sometimes under very mild situations, where you're just questioning your value. And what I mean by that is you question your value and your place in the world, where you feel like I'm not fitting in here, or I think I'm being judged in ways that negatively that I don't want to be judged. That it makes you hesitant. It leads to a little bit of anxiety, thinking that I might get out of here sooner than later. I mean, I was at an event the other day where it was clear that I was on the political spectrum on one side of it, on a very different end of the political spectrum than the other people that were in the room. And I was being asked to talk about some political things, and I chose to say things that were not very controversial and more joining, but I got myself out of there as quickly as I could. It just didn't feel good. And no matter how much work you do about your own self-consciousness and your own self-doubt, there are going to be situations where that's going to be a normal response. I mean, let's face it, people do judge each other. I try to own my judgments. I try to not be judgy, but I certainly have my judgments, and I think that's okay. I think that's for all of us. We have judgments that we have to have. We're going to see things in a certain way. For those who are feeling very self-conscious and full of self-doubt, the feeling is one that people are thinking of you negatively, and it's probably not likely, if for no other reason, people are not going to spend that much bandwidth on you. They just don't care. I'm sorry to tell you that, if that's what you're suffering from, and I'm not laughing at you. I'm just saying, it's not like they don't care about you. They're just not giving you the time that you think they might be giving you. Rarely, from the people I know who really suffer from a lot of self-consciousness and a lot of self-doubt, the things that they're thinking that people judge them about, in my estimation, they're rare. They're not judging this person for looking stupid or being ugly or anything like that. In most cases, I think they probably view these other people in positive ways, honestly. The person suffering from that, if you suffer from that, you don't know that. But I'm hoping learning about this will help. So at least you know what affects are being triggered with self-doubt, which is the affect of shame, and then the other ones with social anxiety, those combinations. Pay attention, learn all 9 of them, and when you start learning how these combine, you can start taking care of the affect part of it. And I'll actually, in a podcast coming up, talk about specific things we can do to identify each specific affect, and then how to not feed it, how to calm it down, how to feed it another line, how to give it another script. Loneliness and rejection, I think, are further up on the shame continuum scale. Loneliness is really painful for human beings. Again, I think, like I said in the previous podcast, we are sophisticated dogs. Maybe not even that sophisticated, honestly, but we certainly have the means with our brains to make ourselves pretty miserable, which dogs don't have. So dogs have it better off than we do, because they are not going to ruminate. They're happy to see us. We don't do the same thing. We can take something and put it in our head and make it real and feed our shame, feed our anger, feed our resentment, and so forth. And we can isolate in ways that dogs would never do. If dogs have the opportunity to be with other dogs, they're with other dogs. They go off and do that. Give a dog a ball, they're happy. Humans are not that easy. The loneliness part of it, especially if it's related to rejection, is one of the most painful things you can do to a human being. I say that it's moving up from self-doubt and self-consciousness, but the truth is, even mild loneliness hurts. And it can also tap into those pools. Even mild loneliness can be super painful because it taps into a pool of memories that we all have of being left out, being rejected, not being loved, being excluded in real or imaginary ways. And again, that's if the affect of shame is triggered, the emotional memories of shame are going to be triggered. And that's the only pool it's going to go to. Just like if you're frightened, the pool of memories around affects is going to be fear. Same like with anger. With each of the affects, it's going to go to that particular pool of memories. The problem is that you're going to use that pool of memories. You're going to pull those up and say, look at all the evidence there is that I am shameful, that I deserve to be lonely. What is wrong with me? And that just adds to the pain of being by yourself. Even if it's for reasons that are justifiable. You just moved into a new city, you don't know anybody, you have a new job, your friends all have COVID, like I had, what happened to me a couple weekends ago. Almost all my friends had COVID, and I'm grateful that I did not get it, but it really was not fun to spend the weekend by myself. There were a couple moments where I went like, oh, I'm feeling pretty lonely. Cognitively, in my head, I could calm myself down. I still felt it, and it was nearly impossible during a couple moments to not jump into that pool of memories and remember things like junior high school. A couple of experiences earlier than that were because I moved every couple of years all my life. I didn't have friends to play with. I had those little memories that came through my head. I went, I remember those. Those were really awful. I had to remind myself, those are not your circumstances right now. Your friends want to be with you. They just happen to be sick. So I took care of myself and didn't feed it. I didn't feed the shame. We are social animals, so we don't want to be alone. Let me clarify that. When we want to be alone, that's totally fine, and that's a normal thing. For me, as pretty much an introvert, I like being alone. What's lonely is when you want to be with other people and you don't have the means. People aren't there, you don't have the resources, or you're sick, you don't have transportation, you might have hearing and sight problems that don't allow you to drive or to get around. Whatever hindrance there is to positive affect, to connection with others, is going to feel shameful and it's going to feel distressing. So again, moving up the continuum a little bit here, to postulate that resentment and mild distress can feel at times like shame-based, because they're very similar. The distress, like sadness, for instance. Sadness I think of as a combination of distress, usually mild distress, and shame, where you're really longing for somebody or an animal or a job that you've lost or anything that you want that you don't have now can cause sadness. Connection with others, connection to a career, connection to a place, homesickness, things like that. That type of sadness is really based on mild distress. It feels awful. And it feels like there's that longing. And that longing is clearly for connection. And biologically, we're wired to feel a certain type of shame. Again, not something that is that's worthy of being ashamed about, but we're feeling the biological affect of shame. And anything that triggers the biological affect of shame is going to go into that pool again, like I said, of our shame memories. So how you respond to shame, self-consciousness, self-doubt, vary, of course, with your attachment style. If you have an anxious attachment style, you're likely to experience shame in those, even the lower, milder forms of shame, more intensely. This is part of what it means to have an attachment style that's anxious. You're likely to be very hyper-aware of the potential for rejection, potential to feel really negative things around other people. You're always worried about their judgment, and that brings up a lot of self-doubt and insecurity. So this often manifests in social anxiety, which fear of judgment around that gets amplified. Now, with avoidant or detached, you tend to feel it less because you're actively trying to feel it less. So you're doing things to make sure that you don't feel it, compartmentalizing it, keeping it aside somehow, but also confronting it. And so it's still there, but it's not being shown to you or anybody else. So as we end here, I just want to stress that the feelings that people have about self-doubt, self-consciousness is super common. It's pretty ordinary. We all have it. There's no way to avoid it. I don't know anyone, even those actors who are in front of large audiences may not feel it while they're performing or even in front of a large audience, but they may in other circumstances, in more interpersonal relationships, for instance. What I'm really trying to stress right now is that the feelings that we have that are the combination of affects are really complicated. They're wonderful to study. Knowing them really helps you know yourself. It helps you pinpoint for yourself what you're feeling and to be able to articulate it, both to yourself and then to others. The more that you can name what you're feeling through both your affective experience and your emotional experience, will also let you be a better creative, if that's who you are, a better writer, a better painter, a better musician. Most importantly, I want you to understand that shame is on a continuum, that it's not an on or off switch, that you're either ashamed or not ashamed, or your mild, low ones, and then higher ones. Take that away from today's podcast. That's a good thing. I'm happy. I'll be back. Until next time, take care of yourself, be well, and be nice to yourselves. Bye.